Hey everyone, we are being joined by Alper. He's gonna give us a guided tour to the Debian installer. I'll let him have the stage now.
Hello, welcome. I'm glad you are here to watch my guided tour to Debian Installer development. I'm Alper from Turkey. I've been working on getting Debian and Debian Installer working on Chromebooks. They have some weird firmware stuff. I've also helped enable the graphical installer for the ARM64 architecture. Those are basically the biggest things I've done for Debian, and they led me to become a Debian maintainer. Also, outside of Debian, I'm doing UEFI firmware replacement for ARM Chromebooks. It's a new project that I've embarked on. And in general, I would explain myself as someone who tries to do things right and learns thoroughly the things I use. And as I said, the title of the talk is a guided tour to Debian installer development. And a few people, while we were talking, well, I told them the name of the talk. They said, which Debian installer do you mean? Do you mean the old one? Well, that's a hard question because this is the Debian installer. The name of the project is Debian installer. It's the current one we have. And this is what I'm talking about, the graphical version of the Debian installer that you can download from the debian.org website and run on your computer. The default thing is this, but if you are more technical, you might know about the text front end, well, Newt front end, but it's a text-based, we call that. You might be more familiar with this. It may be hard to read for the audience, but notice how some languages are missing from this because the text-based cannot support fonts needed to render some language. That's one of the problems this one has. So I prefer the graphical one. But it's quite old. The first mentions of Debian installer development was around 2000, and the first beta release of Debian installer was, I think, at 2003. And as far as the general population knows, there's another Debian installer that is the live install images, which have this Calamares installer installed. And either on the desktop or their start menu, they have this install Debian button, which launches this Calamares installer, which copies the live installer, live image onto their computer as a Debian installation, and then work on that to reduce it to a normal system. It looks nice compared to the current Debian installer, and maybe it's because design fashion changes over time, and well, I'm not sure it's enough. I haven't exactly checked, but here's a short list of things I know Debian installer has a lot of work put into. And I'm not sure if Calamares has that much work put into it in these kinds of things. But as far as I know, nobody has thoroughly compared Debian installer to Calamares. Let's have some more visuals from the Debian installer. This is a high contrast mode for the graphical installer, which increases the font size and turns it into a more easily visible system. It's also possible to do that with the text-based system front end, and there's also a text front end, which is just printing the question and reading an answer in terms of a number. I hear this might be useful for speech synthesis or Braille keyboards. I'm not sure, but it exists, and maybe someone's using it. I don't know. When you boot the Debian installer, there are more advanced options, and from those you can see a selection of other modes like expert install, rescue mode, and automated install. If you choose the expert install, you get a main menu like this, which lists the things in sequence that Debian installer will do. You can get to this menu from the normal installer by pressing escape, and it will show this. And if you go down here, there's a DebConf priority something setting that you can set to low to keep this switch into expert mode from normal mode. There's this rescue mode, which lets you go into an already installed broken system and try to repair it. You can execute a shell in that installation. You can try to reinstall the bootloader and do general troubleshooting. If you start with the expert installation, at some point it will ask you a selection of Debian installer packages you can install, and you can choose network console. And running that network console step starts an SSH server you can connect to from another computer on the same network. And from that connection, you can restart the installer and complete the, go through the installer. And well, this is helpful in another case, because Debian installer has this preceding mechanism that allows you to answer the questions before starting the Debian installer. Like, you give the Debian installer a specific file, and it skips the questions that you have given answers to. So I think it is quite possible to get to this point automatically without any user interactivity. So this might be useful for such configurations. There's also this low memory mode, which I don't know much about, but I wanted to throw out on the table. Entering low memory mode, among other things, this program will proceed in English. You should set up swap space as soon as possible. Like, it's been developed in early 2000s. There was resource constraints, definitely. So Debian installer does a lot of things, has a lot of work put into it, and I think Calamares doesn't right now cover all of it, and the Debian installer is here to stay for a while, and we need people working on it. And I'm trying to give this presentation as a thinly veiled attempt to get people interested in Debian installer development, because it's sometimes getting slow, and changes are being lost in time, and I don't want to like freeze in time and get lost. So, where can we start our tour? The most, I guess, obvious place is the Debian wiki page for the Debian installer. It has a lot of links and documents and references that you should read, but we are not here to read. We are here to listen to a presentation. Someone has done that and is trying to get you to do it later. If you go down this page, it gives you the instructions to check out the source code and redirects you to this DI repository. This is a meta repository that holds instructions to check out all the other parts of the code, and utilities and scripts that reach into those packages and do common stuff in them, like translation work. And the installer team tries to collect all the translatable strings into one place and translate them all at once for deduplication of strings and to reduce work. If you read the README file, it explains that you will need git and the mr command to check out all the repositories. It gives an example of how to clone this meta repository, then run mr checkout. And if you want to build bootable images, CDI installer build readme. But what is this MR tool that it speaks of? It is something called My Repos. It's a tool to manage various version control software repositories that the installer team uses for Git and its Git repositories. It's also developed by Joey Hess, the person behind the Debian installer design, as far as I know. And it's a very nice tool. I also use it in my daily life to manage Git repositories. And this meta repository does check out a lot of other package repositories. Like there's more than 100 of them. And I'm not going to go into all of them. Just know the scope of this work, like the installer work. In this mrconfig file in the same repository, it lists every directory that should be checked out and how to check out that repository. Like the installer directory that we are interested in for building Debian installer images is checked out by git clone something something Debian installer git installer. So that's the repository we should look into next, which is this one, the Debian installer repository. If you look closer, I'm not sure if you can see, but there's a Debian folder in this directory. This is a Debian source package. If you build it like a Debian package, it will create a deb file that's mostly documentation and create a second file, a tar gzip file that holds the netboot, holds the Debian installer images that it builds. It's a very weird thing to do for a source package, but this is a weird one. But let's skip all that. What we are interested in is the build folder, as the previous README said. And in this one, we already have a simple recipe to get things working. Install the build dependencies on the host system, run make to get a list of available targets, build an image using one of the build targets, look in dest for the completed images. That's basically the thing we are going to follow now. We install build dependencies. Of course, we need build essential and all that stuff. And we run dpackage, check build depths. It gives us a list of things to install, and we can install those, or we can run apt build deb Debian installer. That doesn't work right now. It should, but recently there's a hack needed to do some kernel module stuff, so it depends on a specific version of the kernel package that is no longer in the archive, I guess. There's something weird, so right now we have to install these all by hand, but I'm skipping that. Then we go into the build folder and run make list, which gives us a list of things to do. And there's a pattern here at the end: build, stats, clean, rebuild, demo, underscore, whatever the thing that we might want to build. Like the older README suggested build underscore netboot, and there's build cd-rom iso linux. But we are interested in the netboot one, but I am interested in the graphical netboot one, which is build underscore netboot dash gtk. This is unreadable. It's just a thing to show you that when you run this command, it just builds things. And we eventually get something in the dest folder, which is dest netboot gtk mini iso. That is the thing we are interested in. That's a complete ISO image that we can use to test Debian installer. This is also built daily by the Debian installer infrastructure for testing, and it's available online on d-i.debian.org/daily images, blah, blah, blah. You can download it from here and start testing that on QEMU if you don't want to go through the build steps. Here's a sample script of how to run things in QEMU. You get the mini ISO, you create a QCal2 hard disk for it, about 20 gigabytes. You copy some files for EFI boot support, and those two are just optional. You can just run in BIOS mode without hard disk, and it will kind of work, but I prefer Virt Manager. Virt Manager has a graphical interface that lets you configure and save all this stuff, and then you can just keep changing the CD image location and restarting the image. That's like very easy to do for me. If you boot the mini ISO, you get something like this, the grub, but it might be unfamiliar because it's something different than the Debian installer image that we have on the website. If you choose install, you get the graphical install as we have compiled for that. That's the basics of getting the Debian installer to build and testable. We change something in that repository, build it, test whatever comes out, and do that all over again. But that's not the whole story, because we just went through the motions without understanding anything. What does it do is something we should explore. And I think it's best to start from this mini ISO. If you look into it, it's a CD-ROM image and the disk image combined, something called ISO hybrid, I think. The partition listing is that the first partition is 90 megabytes and the second partition is 3.5 megabyte EFI partition that holds some files for UEFI booting. The third partition is 6 megabytes and empty. It's called firmware, but this one might not be able to load firmware. That's a bit of a problem. But the main thing, the main contents of the mini ISO are in the first big partition. And there's a lot of files here. For starters, there's the .disk directory that helps grab, recognize this contents of the image and uses that. The boot directory that holds the grub files. EFI that holds grub configuration in addition to the UEFI boot stuff. A lot of config files, cat files, text files that are used for BIOS booting, and a file called setup.exe so that you can launch things from Windows, and a Linux file, which is the kernel, and the front-end center we have initrd.gz. It's I know it's so important because I know how the system boots, but it's very hard to miss because it's in this 90 megabyte image. This is like 75 megabytes or so. Like it's the majority of the image, and it's something called the CPIO gzip file. If we extract it, we get files like this: bin, dev, etch, lib, lib64. Very familiar names, which are because the initrd system is something like an operating system that is designed to load the rest of the operating system from the disk to switch to it. But in this case, we have nothing else than this. Like, this alone makes the installer work, and this is the entirety of the installer. This Debian installer process builds this initrd, that is the installer itself, and with this it builds various images that go with it. But it doesn't happen to build the one we have on the website, the debian.org. When you go to Debian website, there's a download button. It downloads a netinst ISO. This isn't among those, and this is how that one looks. It has similar folders like .disk, boot, EFI, and more files, and a little bit difference in things, because this has, other than the Debian installer, it has Debian packages that the Debian installer needs to install onto the target. And this is built by another project called Debian CD, which is under the jurisdiction of the images team, so I'm not going to go there a lot because I don't know most of the parts. It needs some Debian mirror, local mirror stuff that I haven't explored, so I don't know much of it. So we now know what the Debian installer build system is designed to do. It's building an initRD archive, that is the installer, but how does it work? If we look into this build directory, we have some files. All right, we have some directories. The most obvious thing to do is to open the README file, and it gives us hints about how the configuration is handled. It evaluates some magic variables from the configuration snippets and feeds some generic rules with it. Like it follows a config, arch, subarch, medium flavor hierarchy, where arch is Debian architecture name, subarch is some subarchitecture, medium is boot medium, and flavor is one level beyond that, distinguishes between other differences, like CD-ROM images can be grub images or El Torito images, as far as I know. But look how there are references to floppy disks in this README. Like this thing is quite old. In the actual make file, this is how the configuration is handled. This is like very different than what would be the conventional operation. It includes common and dir config files, then includes each of the it includes one file per the level of arch, subarch, medium flavor, and includes a local folder. So how this is designed is the targets across the tuple, let's say, the four quartet, the targets in the leaf nodes are the same, and by telling make which thing we want to build, we get a specific make file for that thing and run through that. This is a bottleneck, I think, that limits us to data dependencies. If we try to do parallelized things, that doesn't work because multiple targets have the same recipe. It's a very confusing thing. This is the contents of the config file. We have one file per architecture and one directory for architecture, and common and dir files. And what we are interested in for now is the AMD64 directory, so that we can go into the netboot configs, more specifically netboot GTK. In this config file, the most, I think, important thing that generates the mini ISO is this target equals something something mini ISO variable line. Due to the architecture of this build system, the targets defined here get built, and nothing else gets, well, except the dependencies of these, nothing gets built. This mini ISO, we can find a reference to it in the global make file. It depends on a temp mini ISO and copies it to the mini ISO. And the temp mini ISO calls a recipe called arch mini ISO. Now this arch mini ISO is under config and it's architecture dependent. For x86, it depends on some syslinux and grub EFI files, and it assembles a temporary CD3 and copies files into it, copies a temp kernel and temp initRD into it, then builds an ISO file from that contents. So far, the config part of the system has been about what images to build for Debian installer. And we still haven't seen what files get put in. And the easy part of that starts with the boot directory, which has miscellaneous files that get included in the images, like README files that get copied into the output for ARM systems, and SD card images, artwork that gets included in the grub images so that we have a pretty background, and X-Linux configuration files so that U-boot can work, for example, on ARM architectures. And we also see it in the previous Arch Mini ISO recipe. There's a block that has that enumerates the boot x86 wildcard txt files and substitutes some variables in it and copies them to the CD image tree. And finally, we get to something called package lists that has subdirectories for the different image types that list UDEBs that are put on each image. These UDEBs are the package scheme of Debian installer, let's say. The rest of this README explains the hierarchy of files. Let's check that. And in the package lists directory, we have some common files that are like base, kernel, GTK Linux, GTK common, and for each flavor like netboot, we have a directory, and inside the netboot directory, we have one file for each architecture and one directory for the sub-flavor, like GTK. There's netboot GTK, so GTK is a folder here, and in the previous config files, you can specify for a flavor which package list it should use. And since we want to check out the files for the netboot AMD64 mini ISO, let's go into the AMD64 config file, which includes the common config file. So this is the common config file, and there are some interesting package names in this, like choose mirror, net retriever, download installer. These are not something you would expect an ordinary Debian package to be named. These are installer specific things, like an installer step that downloads the rest of the installer, which is download installer. These UDEBs, as I said, are the package system of Debian installer. If you go to packages Debian.org and search download installer, as we have seen on the previous list, you get this warning that says Debian installer UDEB package. This is intended for the use of building Debian installer images only. Do not install it on a normal Debian system. But there is still a source package link that is net retriever. If you go there, the same warning, but it builds multiple packages. And if we scroll down, we get the VCS Git repository links, which is Salsa Debian.org installer team net retriever. Basically, it's another installer team package. And as you see, there is a Debian directory here, which is fine because this is a Debian package. And the net retriever script. Let's skip that for a moment and go into the Debian directory. It looks like a normal Debian directory. There's this PO folder which is used for translations. There's control. There is interesting post-inst and templates files. But let's have a look at the control. The difference between a normal Debian package control file and the Debian UDEB package control file is this package type : UDEB stanza that is in the binary package descriptions. And there's an additional weird thing that's called XP installer menu item. Let me explain that later a bit. Aside from the control file, there is this postinst file that runs a program called Anna with that net retriever script we have seen before. And it does something. I'll mention Anna later. Let's have a look at the templates file. This template file has a weird structure if you haven't seen it before. There's this template name, Debian Installer, download installer title, and as a comment it has a main menu item. And as a description it has download installer components. And if you go into the expert install mode, you can see this download installer components thing on the installer steps listing. This template gets printed here as the text, and this step, when you run it, runs that postinst file, and the location in this list is determined by that XP installer menu thing in the binary udeb package. So when you run this step, you get something like this, and download installer components, loading additional components, retrieving part1 base. This is what Anna does. Anna uses that net retriever script to download files from the internet and unpack it onto the running Debian installer system. Let's unpack, but installing them onto the Debian installer system. Anna is short for Anna's not nearly apt, but for the Debian installer it will do. That's the description for the package. It's the package manager of the Debian installer operating system, I'd like to say. I'd like to say it that way, because it is right now a Linux distribution on its own that runs entirely from the RAM. It has its own package manager. It has its own bootstrapping mechanism. The installer team is basically maintaining a second operating system inside the Debian project. Next, we have this depends and provides things in the control file. And there's an interesting thing called configured network. That's also something you wouldn't expect a Debian package name. Depends configured network, because this is here because this should be only run after some of the other steps. If you don't have a network, you are not going to be able to run. You are not going to be able to download files off the internet. And if you try to run that step before you have configured the network, it does warn you. It requires you to go through that step in order to install the download installer components step. If you haven't run prerequisites of this, and when you try to run this step, it will also ask to do those steps before this. So there's this dependency resolution while it's installing the installer packages onto the installer system. In another file in this repository, we have net retriever templates, which is named retriever net error. Description: downloading a file failed. Now this isn't here. Well, since this is here, it's reasonable to expect that it is used. And where it's used is in the net retriever script. It's used with some DB input calls, and then you do a DB go call. And what this does is it shows that template in the Debian installer UI when it runs those commands. And you can choose any of these options. When you press enter, you get to this previous thing, and you do db get same template, and red is the result that the user has entered. So you can configure the rest of your logic based on the user answer. And where do those db get and db input and db go calls happen is available from is a shared library called user share DebConf module. It's named DebConf, but it's not this conference. It's the Debian configuration management system that has been built also by the same Joey Hess emeritus developer. I guess the starting point for learning about this DebConf configuration management stuff is the DebConf devel manual page. It's very detailed, but it's not much graphical, so it might not make that much sense. So I want to illustrate some of the things it does. You can have a template that has the type select and have choices and have a default selection. As this is the same one we have seen before, and it shows something like this. This is type select, and you choose one of them, and the rest of the script can handle its output. And there's this string type template. You can also set a default to this, and what it looks like is this. It gives a free-form input field that people can enter whatever they want, and you can then do the post-processing validation on that and display an error or continue your program as you like. There's this password type that is used in Debian Installer to ask a root password. It hides the given string, of course. That's the entire point of it. There is also the Boolean type. You can set it to as default, true or false, and when you get a result from it, it will only be true or false, because it shows a radio button kind of thing that has yes or no. There is this multi-select thing. I couldn't find the example that lists everything explicitly, so this has some variable thing in the choices field and choices-c. The difference between the two is the locale and the translation stuff. While programming what the Debian installer step should do, you can substitute these fields on the fly to generate a menu like this. And when you go check one of those and confirm the answer, you can then the output becomes a comma-separated value of those answers, and then you can process them to figure out which ones were selected. And I left the most basic ones for the last, the note type, which is just a message that you can display. There's the end of the install kind of thing. There's this error type, and you see there is some item variable at the bottom. You can substitute that as well while displaying this template, and that also displays like this. How these things are displayed depends on the front end, and in the text front end, as far as I can remember, the background turns red to indicate that it's an error. There's also the text templates. You can do various stuff like that for those. These are useful for getting the translated versions of messages, and also for a progress bar. You can create a progress bar using db progress start number, end number, db progress info, something sets the message on the progress bar, and then you can do db progress set something to increase the progress bar, like something like this. But this DebConf is not just an installer thing. It's global to Debian, and if you ever encountered a question while you are trying to install Debian, a Debian package, this is running on DebConf. And while Debian install does installations, it pre-configures the DebConf templates of the packages so that they don't have to get asked. Or if you do dpackage reconfigure locales, you get a question that is also DebConf. Well, that's enough for DebConf. Let's go back to what we are here for, the udebs and installer team stuff. If you go to packages, Debian org, and have a look at the Debian installer subsection, this is a lot of packages. Like, we have already seen about 100 packages in the installer team repository, but these are just the ones that installer team maintains. Ordinary packages can have udeb outputs, which will be used as libraries for the other things that the installer needs to do. Those are around, I think, 200 packages or so that have udebs. As far as I could randomly, like, I searched -udeb in this page, and that was about that. But the majority of it is kernel modules. We have about 50 module packages per architecture, per kernel version. That's, so it, like, the amount of packages available to the Debian installer operating system is about 1,000 or so. And what kind of a thing is udeb is best explained in this Debian installer internals document. It's a special kind of Debian package. The main difference is that a lot of policy requirements are waived. Like, it doesn't need to have standards versions in control files. It doesn't have a changelog, the binary file. It doesn't have a changelog, license, manual pages, and checksums, and documentation stuff, because the purpose of this udeb is to keep things as small as possible, because it has to fit in the RAM in the 2000s. Another important difference is the udebs are not meant to be uninstalled or upgraded, so you don't need to care about that. And the package manager doesn't really seem to support that. But in general, to build a udeb, you treat it as a Debian package. You can use dpackage build package, or sbuild, or git build package, and then you get, if your package builds debs, you get debs. If it builds udebs, you get udebs. And how do you include them in the Debian installer build is that we already have hints for that in the README of the Debian installer build repository. Anything listed in package lists local is included in the image that is built. So we can list the name of the package in that file if we have it on the archive. If you have already uploaded to the archive, it can download it from that. But if we haven't, because we want to test the thing we built first, we can just put them in the local udebs directory, and it will check from that. So while building with udebs in that local udeb folder and in the local packages lists, we get some warnings about building with local udebs should not be used for official purposes. And while installing the packages, well, unpacking the packages to create the initRD, we can see our package in the list, and in the apt log we can see it downloaded from the that directory and use it. And that's like the outer loop of how to work with Debian Installer. We change the udebs, build the udebs, put them in DI, build DI, test the mini ISO, then repeat the entire. But there's, for quick changes, there's an easy way. We can just let CI build DI thanks to branch to repo by Philippans. He has put some very nice Salsa CI integration for creating mini ISO files for pull requests filed to udeb packages. You just go to this pipelines menu, there's a DI pipeline, and it has a mini ISO job, and in that mini ISO job, you can download the artifacts, which has a mini ISO. Then you can test that in virtual machine to check that it is doing the thing you want it to do. And there's much more configuration and much more powerful stuff in the branch to repo, but I haven't explored all of that yet. So that's it from me. This was a guided tour to Debian Installer development. It doesn't cover everything, but I hope you enjoyed it. I tried to put things into a linear guideline for people to enjoy. Thank you.
I hope we've all enjoyed the talk about the explanation of how the Debian installer works. I'd like for everyone to give a round of applause to Alper.